Dave Palumbo with another RX Muscle Rant. First rant of 2019, and today's topic is transitioning and posing. What does that mean? Well, you know what? I get so many people who send me pictures, and I've been to a lot of shows, and a lot of times I'll go to a show and people will send me pictures after and say, how come I didn't place well? I don't understand it. Look how great it looked. And they show me the lineup, and they show me a static picture of them hitting a front double bicep, a real lat spread, a side tricep, a side chest, and they don't understand why they didn't do well. And then I remember, seeing them on stage, and their presentation was horrendous. Transitioning between poses is how you move on stage. In other words, when you get up on stage, you're not just statically hitting poses. Okay, front double bicep, then you can do. It's how you move and transition from pose to pose. This really has a mental effect on the judges. They don't just judge you based on poses. They judge you on everything. One of the best, classic poses of all time was Ed Corney. If you remember back from the movie Pumping Iron, Ed was, just amazing. Even Arnold was amazed by how he moved from pose to pose to pose, and so dramatically and so effortlessly. Flex Wheeler's another guy who was great at that. Sean Ray, Kevin Levrone. You have to move from pose to pose as if it's effortless. I see so many guys out there, they hit a pose and then they kind of just let their whole body slump down, and then they just move like the most robotic, mechanical, being I've ever seen, to the next pose, and then they have to set up, and in the meantime their stomach's hanging out and they're not showing anything. Well, the judges are watching you when you do this. They're seeing everything that you're doing. Transitioning is what you get when you practice posing daily. It takes a while before you learn all the poses. Once you learn the poses, then you have to master how to move from pose to pose. And the way I always teach people how to do it is I say, okay, I don't know what it is nowadays. They used to have a 60-second free posing, thing you did at pre-judging. Nowadays, it might be cut down to 30 seconds. It might not even be, it's in non-existence in some events, but at least at the national level and the pros, it's still there. And you have to, hit your 8 mandatories or whatever you do, but it's how you transition from pose to pose that really showcases, you as a bodybuilder. Darren Charles is another tremendous poser as far as transitioning. Melvin Anthony, another great guy. Study these guys, YouTube them, because how you move, okay, from one pose to the next, okay, can sometimes make those poses look that much better. Flex Wheeler once told me that the mastery of posing is how to hide your weaknesses. It's not how you show off your strengths, because everyone knows what their strengths are, right? It's how you hide your weaknesses, because if you can hide all your weaknesses by transitioning and hitting other poses in between hitting the pose that you're supposed to, then people don't notice you have weaknesses. And that's what he was great at doing, okay? They would call, like Kevin Levrone, for instance, they'd hit side chest pose. He would hit the most muscular before he even hit the side chest. You were so impressed with the most muscular he would hit from the side that, and he had a good side chest, you didn't even care anymore. He would always find a way to hit a most muscular in his poses. Flex Wheel too, always hitting arm poses in between everything. And that bamboozled you into thinking that this guy has no weaknesses, because you don't even remember his weaknesses because he was it. Ronnie Coleman was not great at transitioning. He just had so much muscle. He had so much muscle and conditioning that it didn't matter. Paul Dillette, another great example of a guy who was the worst transitioner of all time and probably cost him a lot of titles. Here's a guy who, if you break down his body parts and look at his mandatory poses, he shouldn't lose to anyone back in that era. He should have been Mr. Olympia. But he was the worst at executing the mandatories and transitioning. And I don't know if that came from not practicing enough, being lazy about it, whatever the case may be. He hurt himself, I think, on that stage because he could not transition. So don't complain when you don't place well at a show to a guy who doesn't look as good as you if this guy outposed you on stage. Because that, I always tell people, there's 3 things you have control of on stage: conditioning, coloring, and presentation. And if you let any one of those 3 things fall by the wayside, you're an idiot, because you had complete control over it. So if you go out there and you lose a show because you were outposed by a guy who's not as good as you, shame on you. You had control over that. I know it sounds like a trivial thing, but it's super important when you get up on that stage. Everyone thinks, well, diet is so important, and the drugs and supplements and getting big enough and getting ripped enough and having a great physique. But if you can't show it off, and that doesn't mean executing the mandatories, it means being able to move between mandatories as well, then guess what? You haven't done your homework. So guys, don't lose shows because you're ill-equipped and you're unprepared. Practice your posing every single day, even in the off season, if you want to be the greatest bodybuilder that you can envision. I'm Dave Palumbo with another RxMuscle Rant.